Gini Ushla, de fáilte romh ag chogáil chimhrinnas the Lorland National agus Olscola agus ar náid de fáilte romh a lig go gaiileh go cearn na drábh. Honoured guests, delegates, you are very welcome to the Conul Conference 2026 and to Galway, the city of the tribes. My name is Conul and I'm chair of the conference organising committee. Our conference theme this year is Transforming Futures, Libraries Leading Through Change and Innovation. And this is certainly a time of change and equally a period of innovation which is admirably reflected in the range and content of the presentations that you will experience over the next 2 days. And I say experience as I do not want to underestimate the level of interaction and engagement that you will encounter and enjoy across our programme, be that AI-aided or not. We're also very fortunate to have 2 exceptional keynote speakers at this conference. Our friend and former colleague John Cox, who has made an immense contribution to academic libraries in Ireland, and Dagnia Baltina, Director of the National Library of Latvia, who brings to the conference her perspective from the front line of the fight to ensure our libraries remain trusted repositories of information and cultural heritage. John and Dagnia, we're honoured to have your presence and contributions over the next 2 days. You all know that Galway is a wonderful, wonderful city, and obviously the sunshine helps that immensely. But as a librarian, I just think it's important to draw your attention to maybe a little known fact about Galway that's quite special. 549 years ago, in 1477, Christopher Columbus visited Galway, and this was noted in the margin of his copy of Imago Mundi, and I'm sure all the Galway delegates already know this. St. Nicholas's College, Collegiate College, is the largest medieval parish church in Ireland that is still in regular use. And we're almost certain that Christopher Columbus worshipped there in 1477. So during your conference, if you are wanting to experience more of the ambience of discovery beyond Conul, maybe you take a trip up to St. Nicholas's and breathe in some of Christopher Columbus's air. Before we begin our conference proper, I have some housekeeping matters to share with you. The conference organising committee are here to help. So if you have any questions or issues, please don't hesitate to ask one of us. And I just ask committee members if they could maybe stand up or raise their hands so that people see who you are. There's a few of us in the room here, so don't hesitate to ask if you have any issues at all. And of course, the staff at the registration desk will also be happy to help with any queries that you have. In the spirit of sustainability, we have a conference app. You should have all received an email with the link to download the app and with your login credentials. And in the app, you'll find the programme, speaker bios, sponsor information, and the sponsor quiz, etc. So do use the app. Lunch today takes place in the hotel restaurant. So please make your way there at 1 o'clock and you will be seated. Please note that tea and coffee and dessert will be served afterwards back in the exhibition area. And if anybody has any dietary requirements, if you could let us know as soon as you can, and we will make arrangements for you. You will also see in the exhibition area the posters on display. And there is a poster session in your programme, so please make sure to support the poster presenters by viewing their posters. There will be a prize for the best poster, and we will announce the winners tomorrow. I would also like to say a word of thanks to our sponsors. We are all aware of the financial pressures in all of our organisations over the past number of years, and the Conul Conference wouldn't happen without the generous support of our sponsors and vendors. We really do appreciate your contribution and hope that you have a very worthwhile time here in Galway this year. Delegates, please do visit the sponsor stands in the exhibition area and find out about their latest products and services. Don't be shy. They're really eager to speak to you. And you will also find more information about the sponsors on the conference app and on our website. The sponsors also have a sponsors quiz, so you'll find the answers to the sponsor quiz, which there's a great prize for, also out among their desks and stands. We're particularly grateful for our platinum sponsors, Claravate, EBSCO and AMCH, and would also like to thank Diacom Library for sponsoring our dinner tonight. And finally, thanks also to UCD School of Information and Communication Studies, who have sponsored a delegate bursary. During the course of the conference, we are using Instagram and Blue Sky for social media updates. Conul has a hashtag of #Conul26, so please do make sure you're following us on both of those platforms. And finally, I just wanted to wish you all an interesting and thought-provoking conference. I hope you all learn lots and enjoy these few days in Galway. I will now hand over to Monica Crump, Chair of the Conul Board, to formally open the conference.
Thank you, Conul. Díomh cóide agus fáilte ó chrí go Gaillimh Greenver agus cógáil Conul fiche sé. Good morning, everybody. I am delighted to welcome you all to a sunny Galway, very unusual, and to the 2026 Conul Conference. I'm Monica Crump, as Cronan said, and I have the honour of being chair of the Conul Board this year. Those of you who have attended Conul Conference before know that it is one of the highlights of the year, and I can feel the excitement and the networking bubbling away already. You heard the noise outside. It started. We have a very exciting programme ahead of us, excellent keynotes, fascinating presentations from across all our libraries and across all areas of our work. Just a glance at the programme shows the innovation and creativity that characterises the staff of our libraries. How lucky are our users to have such hardworking and innovative people committed to supporting research, teaching and learning in the best way they can. It makes me so proud to look at that programme and to look at all the work that's underway. Well done to you all. I look forward to hearing more about your work during the conference. Last year at the Conul Conference, we launched the Conul strategy for the period, let me see if this will work now, there we go, for the period 2025 to 2029. Before we begin the presentations, I hope you'll indulge me and allow me to take the opportunity to give you all some progress updates on the implementation of that strategy. I've had lots of questions from people, so I thought, you know what, I have the stage. I'm going to give you the answers, some of the answers. The first theme was connections and community. The Conul groups are the lifeblood of Conul, and they emerged during pre-strategy consultation in 2024 as one of the things that our members of the Conul community value most about Conul. We've made some changes to the structure of our groups so as to give them more autonomy and to ensure that we deliver on our strategy. So we now have 3 strategy delivery groups which are directly focused on delivering aspects of the strategic priorities. The Union Catalogue Implementation Oversight Group, the Conul Conference Group, and the Knowledge and Skills Development Group, formerly known as Training and Development Group. The remaining Conul groups have now become communities of practice, a forum to bring together staff working in similar areas to collaborate, learn from each other, and share best practice. The communities of practice set up to date are research, user services and engagement, cultural heritage, and teaching and learning. And we are very open to further suggestions of communities of practice. If there's an area of library work where you feel it would be useful to bring practitioners together, we'd love to hear about it. In addition, we intend to create task and finish groups as required to undertake particular tasks or initiatives, and already in the last year, one task and finish group was set up to look at the naming of the Union Catalogue, and they have literally done their task and finished, completed their work very successfully and wrapped up as a group. We also have a second task and finish group now working on revising the website so as to reflect all the changes that I've outlined already to the group structure and so on. I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of the Conul Board to thank all of those involved in the Conul groups. You are what makes Conul what it is and why Conul is such a benefit to all our libraries and to our users. Thank you for all the work that you do. A particular thank you to the chairs of the groups who have been unbelievably patient with me and with the board in drafting and redrafting and sometimes redrafting again their terms of reference. We now have a really solid basis for our groups to continue with success. Thank you all, and the very best of luck with your work and collaboration in the coming years. I can see from the programme that you're going to hear about the great work of some of those groups during the conference, so do watch out for those talks. Moving on to our next strategic priority, which is in the area of research collections. Fantastic work has been underway over the last year or so to procure a system that will deliver a union catalogue for Conul. That has now been procured, and the Union Catalogue Implementation Group are working with OCLC to develop UniCat Ireland, a unified catalogue of the shared holdings of the Conul libraries. I won't say any more, as Julia Christopher and Ronan Kennedy will be presenting on this afternoon, but go and have a look if you want to see what UniCat Ireland will look like. Also watch out for a formal launch of UniCat Ireland later this summer. A huge thank you to all of the colleagues working on the Union Catalogue, both in the Implementation Oversight Group, but also I know there's a massive amount of work happening in each of our libraries, readying our data for migration to UniCat. This development will enhance the discoverability and access for our users to the collections that we have in our libraries. It'll also be a significant enabler of future shared collection management and collection development initiatives. For a long time, we've wanted to do more in the area of shared collection management and development and have been hampered by lack of information. UniCat Ireland is going to give us that information on our shared holdings, so it's really exciting. The Cultural Heritage Group, of course, continue to do great work to promote our unique and distinctive collections by regularly showcasing our treasures through social media, and we thank them for that work. The next strategic priority is under One Voice, and I'd like to give you an update on the Conul review. One of our strategic priorities was to review our identity, our structures, our processes, and our membership. Work has progressed on that review over the last year. A benchmarking exercise was carried out of other consortia in the library and the GLAM sector in Ireland, the UK and internationally. This enabled us to learn from other consortia how they organise and structure themselves. While the work of the review is still ongoing, and there's a lot more work to do, some significant decisions have been made, informed by the benchmarking exercise, but also with the stakeholder consultation that you will all have taken part of, that took place during strategy development. I'd like to take the opportunity of being on stage here today to share some updates with you on progress to date. First of all, as mentioned already, we have reviewed and restructured our groups. We promised in our strategy to review the membership of Conul, and I'm delighted to announce that the Conul board has agreed to open up Conul to an expanded membership. We have defined new criteria for membership, and within the coming months, we will be inviting applications for membership from a broader constituency of libraries. Further work is required to put administrative structures in place so that we can open for applications, so please bear with us. Announcements on this and details of the membership criteria will be made available on the website during the summer. And at that time, we'll open to new applications. So don't bother emailing, maybe we're not ready yet, we have a bit more work to do. But I hope we'll get lots of new other libraries wanting to join our great community. Reflecting this future broader membership, and I messed up by not having transitions, this should have been a big reveal, so apologies, you all already know what I'm going to say, I think. Anyway, reflecting the broader membership, we have considered the name Conul, the Consortium of National and University Libraries. The board has agreed that this name will no longer reflect the full membership when we expand according to our new criteria. Therefore, we have agreed a new name for Conul, which I am delighted to share with you today. Academic and Research Libraries Ireland, or ARLI. This news is hot off the press, as it was only agreed last week, so again, please bear with us. It'll take a little bit of time to work on a logo and rebranding of the website, but I didn't think I could miss the opportunity of us all being together today to share this exciting news with you while we're together at the Conul Conference, which by next year will be the ARLI Conference. It'll take us a bit of time to get used to that, but we need to keep saying Academic and Research Libraries Ireland, or ARLI, so that we get used to the idea. The work on implementing our strategy to 2029 continues, and we will continue to keep the ARLI community updated with progress. That community is what makes Academic and Research Libraries Ireland strong and vibrant. Thank you to all of you for supporting Conul and for your future support of ARLI. Together, we enhance our libraries and the services we provide to researchers, students, and the wider community. Before I hand over for our first keynote paper of the conference, I'd like to join Conul in extending my huge thanks to conference organisers and to the conference committee for all their work in organising this conference and developing such an amazing programme. Thank you to all our speakers for sharing their experiences and knowledge with us over the next 2 days. It's no small thing to propose a paper and to share your work with your peers, and I know some of you are probably feeling nervous about the paper you're going to give later on. You're in great company, we'll be very kind. We are all very grateful that you've put yourselves forward and helped to make this such a great programme. Thank you also to those of you who stepped up to be timekeepers and session chairs. The conference wouldn't run smoothly without you, so many thanks. And a particular thank you to our sponsors. We are so grateful for your support, which is essential to the success of the conference. Without your support, there would be no conference, let's be frank. I urge all delegates to make sure that you make the time to visit the sponsors and learn about their products and services. If they go home not having spoken to many people, they will not be back here next year and we won't have a conference. So please make sure to speak to them and learn about what they're proposing or selling at the moment. Finally, thank you to you, our delegates, for attending the conference. I hope you all have an enjoyable and informative conference. I hope you learn lots, make connections with peers in other libraries, and go back to your libraries refreshed. You'll probably be tired, but hopefully mentally refreshed, inspired, and full of ideas. Most importantly, I hope you all have fun. Now, we wouldn't normally take questions for the welcoming address, but given some of the news that I've announced here today, I'm happy to take 1 or 2 questions before I hand over to our keynote speaker. Anyone wants to be brave? If there's no questions, that's fine. I can't see any hands. No, brilliant. The conference remains on time. Good job. Thank you all very much.
Monica got away lightly there, so you can grab her a coffee. Good morning, everybody. My name is John McDonough. I'm the director of GCU Library, and I'm delighted to introduce our first keynote. It's slightly unnerving being in Galway with the sunshine, given that my muscle memory is sitting out in Carrow with horizontal rain and trying to learn Irish, in a vain attempt to get through the Leaving Cert. So I definitely please enjoy the weather. It feels kind of oxymoronic to be sitting inside on a day like this, so definitely use the breaks to get out and get some rays and enjoy it. Our first keynote speaker this morning, who I'm delighted to introduce, is Daghnia Baltina from the National Library of Latvia. Daghnia has had a wide and varied career in leadership positions in UNESCO before becoming Director of Special Collections in the National Library of Latvia, and most recently in 2024, being appointed its Director and the National Librarian. And anybody who's been fortunate enough to visit Riga could be envious of the building that the National Library of Latvia has there, which was opened probably only a few years ago, modelled on the Latvian folk story about the Castle of Light, but very much, I suppose, a statement of the importance of libraries and of learning to the Latvian people and to Latvian society. So please join with me in welcoming Daghnia, who's going to speak to us today about the magic of libraries.
Good day, everyone. Ms. Crump, Conul or Dublin, dear everyone, dear Conul colleagues, dear friends from Galway and from everywhere around Ireland, everyone also who has chosen to be here in this sunny day as a surprise, not sit outside, but to sit inside. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very grateful to Conul for inviting me. And to being here, because I know very well that countries with confident languages and with great libraries actually understand one another instinctively and immediately, based on different grounds than maybe other discussions about the importance of libraries will go. I'm very happy also to join you today, not as an outside observer, but also as a fellow librarian. We know also that the future becomes clearer where memory is strong, and I think the National Library of Latvia has a story to tell, how we make the memory stronger and how we position it. And I think it is currently the role where libraries will step up and say loudly that we are having much more about the country's future and foresight than it is often visible at the first sight. Before I speak about libraries as institutions, I also want to begin with the personal source of this title, The Magic of Libraries. And now I looked at it, and it looked like a little bit like a beginning of Star Wars. I think so, isn't it? So maybe there's a point it. So this picture is a people's bookshelf as the main landmark within the National Library. It's a backbone, a visual, I would say, anchor within the building, the Castle of Light. But so I wanted to begin with the personal source of this title and how I came up with that. For me, the magic of libraries is not really an abstract metaphor, but it comes from a very concrete intuition about continuity, who carries it, who protects it, and who refuses to let it disappear. And so in this presentation, I will use magic here in two senses. First, as a disciplined cultural power, by which societies preserve their continuity and memory and revise and look back and somehow search for internal forces and powers. And later, in contrast, as the dangerous magical thinking that surrounds some claims about artificial intelligence. The next slide is really to refer to that the idea of the magic first came to me when I wanted to speak about women in librarianship and in the world of books. Because at least in today's Latvia, women are the ones that embody the image, the spirit, and also to a large extent the very essence of Latvian books and libraries today. Latvian books are in the hands of women who guide their creation, publication, dissemination, but also safeguarding. The women are the ones that teach also reading and promote literacy, and most importantly, also they are the power and the force that carry expectations for the nation's intellectual ambition. There was a recent example that a new strategy or draft for a strategy for Latvia's 2050 was written mainly by males and was purely based about economical competitiveness. And nothing was mentioned about basically intellectual striving of an independent nation state and nationhood. So it is actually the women in Latvia that increasingly shape the development of both Latvian language, both in book culture, but also the confidence in Latvian language also in our political endeavors and strivings. So it is perhaps our inherited task also now, or I would also take maybe a karma if we look back in the centuries of what has been the role of women, to act decisively and confidently now in the situation where we somehow sense that something is or might be off. So we have to act subconsciously, often intuitively, and this is where women come in. So, and the reason why we have to do is because we simply want that also our great-grandchildren will read in Latvian and will also have Latvian libraries. Myself, as both a woman and as a Latvian, I can personally really express my gratitude to books in the Latvian language, to the intellectual heritage preserved in libraries, and to the encoded habits of inquiry and curiosity that this heritage has given also me. Books and reading indeed have paved the way to rights, independence, self-determination, humanity, mutual respect, knowledge, security, and also the freedom to choose. Firstly, also as females, as women, but also as a nation. It all has built us up, and it has been the phenomenon of a book and the phenomenon of libraries. So, all in all, just to say, I'm just remembering all these other women around me, and I'm just showing you Tautuma. It's one of the Latvian ethno-pop music bands that now embody the contemporary feeling of how we connect to our predecessors, to these very strong ancestral women that stand behind us. I can also say I'm just not prepared to let loose this old instinctive knowledge that continuity must be protected. And there's also this book, which you might also have in your mind as I talk. In this book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, the wild woman is just often not sentimental. It's very active, proactive. It just does things. It is acting. It's a woman that acts. She is a force of survival, intuition, memory, and renewal. And she knows when something essential is in danger. And to be very frank, I have also begun to see libraries this way, that we simply have begun to act. We nail it with our action because we see that something is in danger. So the magic of libraries in this sense is not decorative, it is just primal. Libraries gather the fragments, keep the fire, guard the names, carry the stories, and make sure that a community can still recognize itself tomorrow. And basically that we have the foresight and we do and make our actions based upon the foresight of the generations that will come after us. This instinct for continuity and the need to look back to some kind of these ancestral forces becomes clearest in the moments of danger, and it is then that nations also reach out to poetry, to songs, to rivers, look back into nature, books and libraries, and not as ornaments or some kind of visual peace elements, but really as forms of survival. In 1919, the Irish poet William Butler Yeats wrote, "The things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world." At the same time, in the same year of 1919, the greatest Latvian poet, Rainis, published his most famous long poem, The Daugava, almost prophetically also describing a nation rising against its own threatened destruction. Water of life, water of death flowed in the Daugava. I touched the water's surface. I felt both within my soul. And this is a wall painting, it's a huge mural actually, in the middle of Riga, based upon this very famous poem, and which has also been turned into one of the most famous national hymns that we perform as a ritual in our song and dance celebration. So you see a lot of this ancestral memory just coming out of it, and there is something magical in it. These famous lines, written at a dramatic moment in Irish history and at equally dramatic moment in Latvian history, remain also, unfortunately, painfully relevant today. As especially also in Latvia, we also face quite a visible geopolitical threat. We also see a lot of changes in the world regarding the regimes of the world, but also challenges by the technological changes. One, Yeats more speaks of disintegration, of the terrifying moment when the center falls, when order, trust, and meaning begin to collapse. The other, Rainis, speaks of passage, sacrifice, and renewal, of a river that carries both death and life, both wound and survival, and danger and continuity. Poetry thus returns to us in times of crisis because it says that political language often cannot say. It gives form to fear without surrendering to it, and it reminds us that nations are not held together by administration, economy, or security alone, but by memory, language, ritual, imagination, and the shared stories that, through which people recognize themselves as a community. And I think it's very important that also through our work as libraries, we somehow secretly encode these possible findings of these secret codes or secret recognitions, whomever will find them in the future. Hence, it is no coincidence that whenever we talk about the power of our countries, we so often also reach out for something subconsciously miraculous, symbolic, almost mystical, like these poems, these words of wisdom and rituals of gathering, rituals of remembrance, rituals of reading, rituals of coming to libraries. The former president of Latvia, Vaidavīķe Freiberga, both as a stateswoman and also as a scholar of Latvian folklore and identity, has repeatedly shown how deeply a nation lives through such symbolic forms, through song, language, inherited memory, and collective acts that are more than performance. These acts are ways in which people confirms its existence to itself and to the world. Her lifelong work has linked Latvian national consciousness with language, literature, and folklore. And it also reflects then in the way how national cultural institutions have somehow taken up the ethos of how we function and what is our role for the nationhood and for the statehood. And this is, I think, where actually the magic of libraries begins. Libraries are not merely institutions that store culture after the fact, but we are among the rituals through which a society confirms its continuity. And here comes the Castle of Light. What you see in the picture is actually the Castle of Light sitting at the banks of the river Daugava. The sculpture there is of the poet Rainis, this most the greatest poet of Latvian literature, and of course the Castle of Light at the background. And as we can see also from this picture, that the magic here is not an illusion. The magic here is not to provide escape, but actually magic is the strange and serious power through which also the Latvian society transforms, or at least finds an inspiration and strength and independence to transform. So when things fall apart, libraries are among the institutions that help the center hold, not the center of power necessarily, but the center of meaning for the nationhood and statehood. We hold memory, create trust, and make transformation possible. And thus we are part of instinctive survival code transmitted, often silently, to the generations ahead of us. And that is why I speak today about the magic of libraries. In libraries, the water of life and the water of death are both present. The memory of what has been lost and the knowledge from which renewal can begin. As I'm here now, and as I mentioned, the parallels between Yeats and Rainis, it is actually not accidental. Ireland and Latvia are two small language cultures where literature, folklore, language revival, and political self-determination have repeatedly met. And this is why also the history of book matters so deeply in both our countries. Our two countries know each other already actually for very long, often without words, but with a very strong and silent understanding of each other's positions. We work together in the League of Nations, and Latvia is always remembering that Ireland was among one of the countries and states that did not recognize Latvia's occupation by the Soviet Union. And we still are very grateful for you for that courage. And I think it's great. Thank you. Our peoples thus are united by a worldview rooted in similar historical experiences, both based upon complex relationships with our neighboring states, challenges caused by migration, but also struggle for independence and the preservation of language, statehood, and nationhood. Both Ireland and Latvia became modern sovereign states in the early 20th century after longer periods of foreign rules. Both Irish and Latvian languages went through periods when they were marginalized in favor of a dominant language. Yet both languages were preserved, defended, and consciously revived as symbols of nationhood. In both traditions, folklore and literature provided more than artistic material. Latvian folk songs, dainas, Irish myths and fairy lore, the collections and reinterpretations of these are the ones that also inspired poets and also some of the statesmen and women 100 years ago. All of these actually created the cultural depth beneath political struggle. In recent decades, many Latvians have moved to Ireland, and you can see Latvian Cultural Days in Dublin, and we have quite a large community. I actually want to ask a question. How many of you know a Latvian? Oh, pleasure. Give my greetings to the lovely Latvians here. You know, it's, I don't know if it's the same for Irish, but whenever a Latvian meets a Latvian, we are always happy to meet each other. It's like, you know, findings, especially if you're abroad, you're always like, oh, you speak Latvian, and then it just brings so much light just by knowing that there's somebody like you. But so yes, but all this also in our diaspora experiences in Ireland echoes the way also how Irish diaspora preserved Irish culture abroad, and Latvian communities in Ireland now actively also mix the two cultures through festivals, choirs, language teaching, and family networks. And actually there is such a thing as Latvian folk dance groups, Latvian choirs, Latvian festivals. I know some of you might have visited or seen it. We still wear our folk costumes for our events here, so we have brought it all along with us, and we enjoy having it. But as we are talking about libraries, I also wanted to specifically talk about book history. And here, because I think it's particularly beautiful parallel both for our two countries, but also to make the case for the power of library when it decides to make magic for the nationhood. And it will be based upon the 500th anniversary we celebrated in Latvia last year. So if poetry reveals how nations imagine themselves in crisis, then history of first books shows how nations first become visible to themselves in print. The first book printed in Irish appeared in Dublin in 1571 it's a religious and instructional text through which Irish language also entered the technology of print. The Latvian story has a different story of origin, and I think it's also a very powerful beginning. We know from archival evidence that in 1525, a printed text in Latvian, Estonian, and Livonian, most probably printed in Wittenberg, were seized and burned in Lübeck, and they never reached Riga. No known copy has survived, and thus this makes the first Latvian book both a historical fact, because we have a very hard historical archival evidence of capturing of this book cargo, actually having a special trial on this book cargo, stopping it and deciding to burn it. What is a funny fact there, we never found an evidence that actually a book burning happened in the following couple of months in the same city of Lübeck. So we still have a hope. And the second hope we still have is that such a weird occasion should have been reported back to Vatican, which we also haven't found out that it actually took place. We're still in investigation. But as fascinating as the story goes, it's both a historical fact, but also a national mystery, because the physical book of 1525 does not exist. The oldest surviving printed text in Latvian is the 1585 Catholic Catechism, the same as yours, printed for us in Vilnius and preserved today as one of the foundational witnesses of Latvian written culture. And you see there an exhibition we organized in 2021 to showcase this one copy of the Peter Canisius Catechisms from Uppsala University Library. And it was a very funny also approach to the exhibition, because it both marks that we brought back to Latvia for this one showing of this first book printed in Latvian, this first surviving book. But it also marked 400 years since the looting of Riga, which brought all these books to Uppsala and to Sweden. And a fun fact goes that the Riga Jesuit book collection that was then looted from Riga became the founding collection of the Uppsala University Library. And it's interesting that we looked at these collections from the perspective that actually how the intellectual thriving of Riga from the 16th century has influenced the development of thinking and education in Sweden in the later centuries. But that's a step back. So what we can see from these examples on parallels from our book histories, it is that our both book cultures entered print through actually modest, practical, religious books. Because also if we look in the Canisius we have, and possibly yours, it's a very small book. It's a very small print. And it's not really very significant either. Yet those books, and for us also the book that does not exist, they all have become milestones. And I think in neither of these cases anyone could have actually imagined the historical force such modest text would acquire over the centuries, and what would be the ripple effects of these seemingly smaller publications. The first book is therefore never only a bibliographical beginning. It marks the moment when a language enters public visibility and becomes capable of transmission beyond voice, household, and parish. And in Latvia, there is this paradox. A first book, known through archival evidence, but not preserved as an object, actually became the intellectual starting point of the 500th anniversary program, which we finished last year. And in the hands of a library, even absence became a very productive magic wand to actually transform and influence the way how Latvian society looks at ourselves now. So I will tell you a little bit about how we framed the 500th anniversary program and our insights from it, and also reflect on a couple of exhibitions and a couple of messages and statements we brought along with this 500th anniversary. This is an installation called Verticality of a Nation, which was devoted to all the publishers of Latvian language books in late 19th century. So we talked and we actually celebrated the publishers that increasingly both translated at the end of the 19th century, but also created the first encyclopedias, conversation dictionaries, and other reference books, including school textbooks in Latvian language. And so we created the verticality of all the books by this one publisher. It's about 20 meters long, in a way, in comparison, an artistic shelf of all the books that he had produced. But so, as we started the 500th anniversary program, we rooted it actually in a very, well, I would say, classical research. We started with a study of book history, library history, and reading history. And one often argued at the very beginning that nations should not focus too much on history. Yet for every nation, awareness on its own history actually is essential in every field, and especially when the awareness remains distorted, and this is what we discussed, incomplete or burdened by inherited simplifications. And thus the work of the anniversary focusing on the history, and I very much push back when somebody talks that we worked so much on history. It was very important for us to work on the history, to gather the arguments and to build our argument and confidence in our nationhood. So it was not for us ceremonial. It required research. We looked and corrected many myths, and we also brought up the courage in our society to look into certain aspects which were either forgotten or little known. So the National Library of Latvia served as the driver of the program, performed in this sense also some kind of this library magic. We transformed a historical curiosity into an institutional duty, then into a national conversation, and also finally into a political statement about reading, language, and nationhood, which I actually currently am very determined to bring as a statement for the Latvia 2050 major development strategy. The anniversary taught us about 5 lessons about what libraries can do for nation self-understanding. First, it allowed us to reconsider simplified and provincial representation of our cultural history. I mentioned this example of the Uppsala University Library. It was the heritage which was always perceived as something that is lost and we have nothing to do with it. So we deliberately changed the approach to it, how we looked at it, as it is something of us. So the next example is the parallel histories of Latvian and Estonian books. We also re-examined the Baltic-German relationship and history of our shared cultural space. This complex inheritance shaped our also European traditions, including the drive for education, self-improvement, and curiosity. And thus, this anniversary helped us to build a stronger also, or renew a stronger, I would say, network of ideas or connection of ideas between Latvians, Estonians, and Germans, including also through research on Baltic German founding collections and recognizing them as the founding collections of the National Library of Latvia, but also focusing and doing research on smaller private or manor house libraries by Baltic Germans before 1918, before the founding of the independent Latvian state. Secondly, it forced us also to accept the contradictory fate of Latvian book culture, because it is very contradictory. As I mentioned, it starts with a book that doesn't exist. The burning of books in 1525 has echoed across 5 centuries, and we see a lot of pattern there. What we experience on social media today also must be understood as a kind of burning, because somehow dialogues are broken, communities are eroded, and memory actually becomes very vulnerable and untrustful. So the program therefore also acknowledged destroyed libraries. We acknowledged and looked and researched these destroyed and lost libraries. We relocated collections, and also we brought up unspoken injustices about these collections. Yet this was not a return to victimhood, and I think this is something very different. I think we approach this anniversary as a possibility to reconcile with various very painful pasts. And often these pasts are not only painful, they are often also shameful to us. Because it's not only that we have been the ones that can always say the others did it. We were the ones that burned the libraries ourselves as well. For example, when you look on the 1905 revolution, it is the Latvian peasants that bring fire to all the German minor houses and just simply burn down those libraries and knowledge accumulated there. So as yet we wanted to take ownership, reconcile and look back and see these also past contradictory moments in our history. We emphasized choice. We looked at the courage of people. Also during the Soviet occupation, we see a lot of individual librarians, and we looked into their histories who were hiding books, which then suddenly simply came up into being, obviously being given from a librarian to a librarian over the years of occupation, because not always they were the same persons, but they were somehow preserved in various hidden places, and it's a fascinating story. We also looked into courage. We looked and also these minor and grander acts of preservation, and the possibility of also, we looked at these empowered actions of how libraries have acted to stand against or to carry out certain research when it was totally not possible. And this is, for example, an example that the rare book reading room at the National Library, which was established in mid-1950s, it became actually a very silent research point for also the national history. Often, of course, in the, I would say, political discourse source in order to be presented. But that was the way how they could gather those documents that we can now build our also book history based upon the documents they actually saved and gathered as an argument of not providing access to everyone, but still of collecting them. The same acceptance that went through was also about the diaspora outside Latvia. So also at the National Library, it's very weird how we look at the diaspora collections. So after the Second World War, there was a huge Latvian diaspora that left Latvia and settled in the West, mostly in the United States, Australia, also South America, a lot in Germany, some in UK, quite a lot of them also in Sweden, a little bit in Denmark, basically scattered around the world. And there was a lot of dichotomy between us and them and who were the real Latvians there. So also we looked at their book culture as something that happened outside. And of course, they often also brought their book collections to Latvia in the early 90s as a gift to the nation, and now you should learn how the free people think, which was very intimidating to the Latvians that were part of the Soviet occupation. And we did not ever thought of ourselves as somehow less equal or less knowing, but of course we had different histories for 50 years. But this anniversary allowed us to approach these two groups, and currently we are also negotiating how to describe the exile books in our collections and how to recognize them actually. But so this was something which was a moment of coming together. Thirdly, the anniversary also placed libraries and bookshelves at the center of civic imagination, even for the sake of design and interiors and everything, because we aim to challenge the myth of the library as a passive place and to strengthen it as a habit, value and support for every resident of Latvia. This is a phrase from our National Library strategy. But this was something which we see as an alarming trend in Latvia. People are very much vulnerable to all the social media. They read less, they have less inquiry, they have less curiosity, they are more passive and less involved. So we wanted to actually showcase the value of libraries for leading conversations, for making simply our own confidence grow. And this is where we wanted to also showcase that if artificial intelligence promises us to save some time, the magic of library is that it actually extends time because it gives the possibility to linger, to deepen, to raise beyond the immediate need, and to somehow gain more time indeed. And there is no stronger also symbol of belief in another person's future than a library and a librarian. And I think this is also something which we managed to inscribe in the minds of the people, that they started to look at the librarians, but we have been massively, I would say, coding it in the minds of the people, that if you need anyone, and if there is somebody who simply cares, it is a librarian. And I think you can totally recognize this. There are not many professions that want others to succeed, I think. Fourthly, the program also showed the book circuit as an interconnected system. The idea of the book circuit comes from my professor Robert Danton, which obviously you all know. But it was also something that was very important for us to showcase that we are all in the same boat. That no single actor is central because we are all very interdependent from each other, and we all share the same journey. And I think it was also very important that we managed to bring on the table that there is this one mutual understanding where we don't want to fight about, that books in Latvian we want to have and to continue exist also in the future. And also that this is something that can bring the country together to stand up, that is something that we don't argue. That actually, yeah, we want books in Latvian, and we want people to read in Latvian and to converse in Latvian and to think in Latvian and to write their scientific texts as well in Latvian. But that's another question, because we are very much pushing back on all the international research evaluation reports that say that we only have to publish in English, but we very much push it back and say, no, we also equally need to publish in Latvian. But that's the story, because the National Library is also a research institution. And the fifth argument that comes is that the university also challenged this assumption that the digital world can replace physical presence and analog experience. Artificial intelligence indeed has already shown the danger, and we organized a couple of conferences on this, of becoming a false panacea, accelerating work without necessarily deepening understanding, and also not necessarily changing some kind of the ways we work, simply because applying AI tool or some kind of technology does not actually often solve the problem. But of course, we still need to learn how to harness it. And thus, the program also emphasized the experience of the original. So we brought out a lot of exhibitions showing originals, both at the National Library of Latvia, but also around the whole country. Because when we wanted to showcase that while digital technology can make information accessible, it actually cannot, the accessibility argument cannot directly create a meaning to it. So you need to have this some kind of interaction to transmit a better understanding of the original. And also we wanted to talk about the skills that libraries support and protect and promote, the skills and in general how the original teaches us patience, respect, and responsibility for the long chain of experience before us, mistakes and discoveries before us and after us, and to see us with a little bit more of humbleness within this long belt of continuity. So in front of original documents, one regains the ability also to think deeply, to stop again time, and understand slowly and fully inhabit the momentum. So thinking about the 500 years and the next 500 years of the books, the central question became very urgent. So, and this is where I will come to my next point, is the question was, what will we leave behind as a turning point to ensure that books in the Latvian language continue for at least another 500 years. If in 1525 the answer was mere the fact that demand arose for books in Latvian by the German priests in the first Lutheran churches in Riga, today the answer actually might be similar, and we might draw some parallels from what happened in 1525 and what we can repeat today. So what we thought was, okay, then we need to create a compelling demand, a habit of reading books in one's own language, in one's own country, and a subconsciously encoded pattern for a library. So we chose to deliberately create a task to raise awareness of the value of the Latvian language also today, and to foster confidence in its competitiveness, sustainability, preservation, resilience, and quality. The question, of course, was how. To go back to one of the statements that we brought up with the 500th anniversary program, I just want to pull out one other detail. We actually proved that the Latvian language have been able to surrender and survive all the previous political changes, all the previous economical challenges, all the previous technological advancements, and all the previous, I don't know, social challenges or changes. So we were very calm in saying that actually it is okay, languages survive. We are not under much bigger pressure now, but we have to act decisively. So what we did, we created the right to read, the Riga Manifesto, and it became our contemporary set of theses. You know, I go back to Lutheran, as we go back to Martin Luther. So we created our own set of theses, as it was for as for an impulse for our first book. We created a public argument to be placed before society, not as a nostalgia for books, but as a call to defend reading as a condition of freedom and our nationhood. I have put the QR codes where you can find it in English language if you need. It's also translated in German, I think French as well. The manifesto is really about not letting go of the thread that weaves our nation together. And I have to say, when we drafted this document, it was very complicated because there were so many demands from so many sides that everybody wanted to put their own statement. For example, about the importance of making language light and understandable for everyone, for all the inclusions and everything. And then the question was, how do you pull all this together in a one, actually concise document that would still capture it all? And so we put as a backbone of it this idea in mind that what we actually want at the end of the day is our independent state, our democratic society that speaks and reads Latvian. So it both puts this idea in the minds of our people, but it also asks us to take the action into our own hands so that Latvia can shape its future from a stronger intellectual starting point. And here we bridged back to the 19th century experiences, because if we look on the 19th century experience of Latvians, our only comparative advantage is our literacy rates. We read, we write, we publish books, we educate our children. That's our currency. So we don't have to invent anything new. That is obviously also our future resource and raw material. But we have to be very conscious and call out that also in the coming 500 years, we want to be the intellectual society that sticks together and wants to live together. So we wanted reading to be in Latvian and explicitly in Latvian language, so we put it out in Latvian language to become a shared value that unites people of different ethnicities in Latvia and strengthens our civic nation. I had to also say that over years, and because of Russia's attack and invasion in Ukraine, it has become more easy to talk about nation state, statehood, also Latvian language as it was before. There was years when it was very unpopular to defend Latvian language because everybody thought it's now available for everybody and why we shouldn't be talking in other languages. But as you know, it's not always about the knowing of other languages. I also know other languages, but I do make a choice to speak Latvian and to buy books in Latvian. And this is what we wanted to sensitize and actually to bring up. The manifesto restores thus the confidence and offers a way out of uncertainty about how to present our nation, how to understand innovation, and how to remain competitive amid digital changes and challenges. The answer is not that books will contain any ready-made solutions, but the answer is that reading will develop the ability to think, to recognize the structure of arguments, to understand opposing viewpoints, and to accept complexity, and also to cultivate empathy. But I don't have to tell you that because you know it. But we wanted to really use this 500th anniversary and, of course, the massiveness and massive symbolism of the National Library as the Castle of Light as this founding rock upon which we can step upon to raise further. So we wanted to make also this argument, which I mentioned, of the 19th century, that innovation will be found in books, not because we will find the answers there, but because books will train the mind that innovation requires. And now it's also widely also recognized by many research projects. If the anniversary gave us the historical arguments, the exhibition Freedom Begins with a Book gave us the human one, and we wanted also to explain this phenomenon of reading, how reading transforms people before it transforms states, and actually how the formation of the Latvian statehood actually starts with this first printed book and dissemination of books in Latvian language and translation of any kind of text in Latvian language. So we pictured reading as a sequence, a small and slow metamorphosis that page after page changes a person. So this is a wall basically from an exhibition we created, and it walks from right to left this time because it's the entrance of the exhibition. So we pictured first reading as a prayer. The printed word in Latvia also first served to translate and spread the Christian message from church to peasant households. People also opened books to find comfort, order, and words that could somehow organize the world that somehow felt uncertain. Reading then at first was also a liturgy, but it yet served a lot an inner life. What is very important to say that Latvia still is a very paganic state, paganistic. And Christianity really settles in about in the 19th century. And I would say, I'm not baptized in the fourth generation. So, and I have my family's history from about 1701, and we know this history where Christianity did play a lot of role for our book history and national consciousness, but it was not decisive of who we are. But I think we wisely used it, because what was followed by this, of course, all these forms of prayer became also forms of learning and study, and printed word and indeed enabled instruction, first to preach, as it raised from mostly church schools, then to read and write, and then to acquire knowledge and pass it on. So we talk about calendars, primers, and particular practical manuals that offered also various advice of how to farm fields, cure illnesses, prepare food, organize household life, and understand one's duties. So we really can trace back how we built from this reading history. Then we looked at that reading also provided something else, because man does not live by bread alone, but also reading books and reading taught people to feel and to raise their emotional world and understanding of others. And we have the first translation, so there's prayer, study, household, how to farm and how to do this, and sensitivity. And so emotion also became education too. The schooling of the heart of people also schooled and grew Latvians as a nation. And of course, we at first find these first books which are similar to you, which are not the high literature, but are very mundane, everyday translations or retelling of various other stories. But they are the ones that allowed us to feel along with any kind of holy martyrs, adventurers, orphans, or also heroes. And finally, in the 19th century, the passion for reading, we can see, becomes unstoppable. The number of books and newspapers rose rapidly, creating a national literary tradition. We have folklore collections published, we have our own novels, epics, plays, and poetry. And we can see that reading no longer meant only prayer, instruction, or household knowledge. It became actually the imagination, argument, comparison, and self-recognition. So we do see, and we want to see, that it was the habit of reading, the rise of tradition of having also Latvian libraries, mostly prescription libraries, that it all builds up into the act of freedom. So to read is also to bring new voices and histories into one's mind, to question inherited narratives, to imagine alternatives. And recognizing the power of words was that we wanted to unite and inspire, to raise Latvians from kneeling prayer, and in this exhibition we actually play out how the kneeling prayer takes place. So there's a stool for kneeling. So how we rise from school desks and work benches to assert our freedom in our own language in 1918 through this act and phenomenon of book in Latvian and reading in Latvian. So for us, freedom in this sense did not begin only in the parliament or the first call of Latvian parliament or even in the battlefield of the First World War, but it began much earlier into the slow transformation of our society through reading, that people became more of citizens. Whenever we talked about this exhibition, we thought that we will finish in 1918 because this is the moment Latvian statehood is being founded. So what happens then? And we were fascinating with an ideas. So what does reading mean to die? What does it mean for us to read to die? And we came back to this magical thinking, indeed, and magic. And we defined it. It's actually for to die, reading becomes an act of stopping time, and it's a time machine, actually. The capacity to stop time is no longer merely cultural or psychological. And in the digital environment, it has become a political also need. A society unable to pause, read, compare, and remember becomes easy to govern by speed, fear, and noise. So we put as an argument of why we need reading to die, that we want to bring back the attentional reading, sustained, patient, solitary, that in a way balances the rush around us. Also, it allows us to stand still longer and to think and to remember and to be present to what really matters. And this exhibition also plays it out. Another exhibition we talked about was about if reading is so fundamental, and this was our thinking of how it went, if reading was so fundamental for our freedom, what kind of institution guarantees that freedom is sustained in practice? And this was the question behind another anniversary exhibition, which was called, Is a Library a Birthright? By birthright, I do not mean entitlement here, but I mean a public guarantee that every person may enter the world of knowledge without asking permission from markets, platforms, or inherited privilege. Although the exhibition began from library history, because 1524 is the first year when we open a public library in Riga, it's not actually a public library, but we call it Riga First, Riga City Public Library, based upon looting of Catholic monasteries because of the Reformation. So there are some books preserved still from that. So we trace back the history actually of libraries in Riga very early, even for the European history, which is city library, which could be referred as a public library, and which becomes a public library, more public later on. But so if we talked and began from the library history, it gradually actually became a dialogue between libraries and technologies. It asked whether the library in an age of platforms and artificial intelligence actually remains a civil right rather than a cultural luxury. Artificial intelligence in this sense was not a departure for this theme. It was actually a contemporary test to it and how we can respond to it with all the digital changes. Libraries actually have survived many knowledge technologies, and we see that in our collections greatly. Similarly as the Latvian language, when we look back at it, we see it's actually a very stable institution. We are not actually afraid also of new instruments, but generative AI, however, is not just another tool added to the librarians' desks, because it enters the territory where libraries have always worked: language, sources, evidence, memory, interpretation, and also trust. The question is therefore not whether libraries should use AI, but because of course we should, where it is useful. But the question is different. What happens to knowledge when fluency begins to imitate authority of an institution? So we wanted to prove that actually it is important to maintain library as an institutional power and force within an overall governing system. And here I come to my next argument about AI, because I thought it's not polite anymore to talk about anything on libraries without talking about AI. So, and these are two pictures about National Library shut last summer with floods and everything. One is from a sewage hole actually under the library, facing the library. Another one is a beautiful lightning that struck the library. Because I think that's also something, the interruption we are facing on libraries today through various AI tools. Because we see that a large language model can produce a beautiful sentence without knowing whether it is true. It can summarize without reading in the human sense, or sound confident without responsibility, erase provenance by making borrowed language appear ownerless, and turn citation into decoration. The danger is not that AI will think too much, but actually the danger is that humans might think too little around it. And that is, again, another argument for library being a birthright. So we face an actual intellectual corrosion, not the sudden collapse of knowledge, but the slow weakening of the habits that make knowledge possible. Again, the close reading, comparison of sources, citation, doubt, verification, and patience. Here, the theme of magic becomes useful in a stricter sense. Libraries possess their own form of magic, the transformation of fragments into memory, books into public meaning, reading into judgments, collections into inheritance. Artificial intelligence, by contrast, is often surrounded by magical thinking. Current AI discourse frequently invites the belief that scale becomes wisdom, prediction becomes understanding, fluency becomes intelligence, and access becomes knowledge. Melanie Mitchell has been one of the most precise critiques of this confusion. She's a computer science herself and actually a complex systems scholar. And she does not reject AI as technology. Rather, she rejects the mystification of AI as intelligence. Contemporary systems may produce impressive linguistic performance, but they do not possess robust understanding, abstraction, common sense, or responsibility. Their apparent authority rests on human-created language, human labor, statistical patterning, and vast training corpora. Mitchell's critique matters for libraries because it clarifies the central danger. Societies might begin to accept fluent output as a substitute for knowledge. Less magical thinking and more realism, this is also a library principle. And from this perspective, libraries should speak up with greater confidence about what we bring to the AI debate: provenance, memory, public purpose, non-commercial trust, and the discipline of reading and inquiry. Knowledge is not mere an output. It has a source, a history, a method, and a context. And these are precisely the dimensions that generative AI tends to obscure when it produces an answer detached from visible evidence. The absence of libraries from major AI conversations is therefore striking. We talked about all the values libraries add, all the, convincing arguments about books and reading, all the very assuring intent also of these institutions to the greater good of general society, but yet libraries are absent from any kind of documents. Technology companies speak with governments, investors, universities, schools, even, as we know, religious institutions. The recent Vatican engagement with AI, including Pope Leo's encyclical Magnificat Humanitas, shows that artificial intelligence has already entered the moral vocabulary of human dignity, labor, power, inequality, peace, and regulation. They also the Pope invited Christopher Olla, the co-founder of Anthropic, and also a significant figure for AI safety and interpretability, that they talked about this. And the debate was about AI that was not merely technical, but also civilizational. Yet, these ground conversations about AI and humanity, about the basis of the civilization, they don't have libraries, books, or reading anyhow mentioned in any kind of context or any kind of different tenses. And it's very funny that these fundamental institutions and rights have become so marginal. The marginality is not a minor professional grievance. It also points to a deeper misunderstanding of libraries. Decision makers often see libraries as service points, heritage stores, community rooms, or nostalgic institutions. Such views overlook their more fundamental role as infrastructure and institutions, decisive institutions for truth, democracy, statehood, and nationhood. Libraries are among the few institutions designed to resist precisely those weaknesses that AI can intensify, as mentioned, the loss of provenance and so on. The policy frameworks from around Europe confirm the problem. The Librarin policy brief, Libraries in the Age of AI, Safeguarding Cultural Heritage and Trust, notes that most European countries and AI policies still overlook the contribution of libraries. Among the 17 EU countries examined, only Denmark and Slovenia include libraries in national AI frameworks, while Luxembourg alone identifies libraries as strategic actors in its national AI strategy. This is not simply an omission in wording. It is a failure to recognize that AI governance requires institutions capable of preserving public trust, cultural memory, ethical access, and verifiable knowledge. A similar absence also appears in debates on academic freedom. European institutions, also of higher education, often discuss legal protections, democratic backsliding, threatened scholars, digital monitoring, and various alliances and any other points. These concerns are necessary, but the absence of libraries from the wording of such documents is striking. So we do look like in a world of different mirrors. So we as libraries see a world completely different. Because academic freedom does not live only in the legal status of universities or in the autonomy of scholars. It also depends on collections, catalogs, archives, reading rooms, licenses, sources, preservation systems, metadata, and the professional labor that makes scholarship findable, accessible, and durable. Without libraries, academic freedom loses part of its material foundation at all. But several explanations are possible, and that's why we have to look at the mirror. Policy makers often define education too narrowly, limiting it to schools or universities and students, while libraries serve these institutions, and that's why they are often overlooked. Also, another problem might be the decentralized governance that also weakens visibility. Often libraries again disappear under other institutions they are either related to or they are supervised by. I have a time running out, right? I will finish quickly. So this confuses. So this digital shift has created another false assumption, namely that platforms, search engines, and online access reduce the need for libraries. This confuses information availability with knowledge and technical access with intellectual access. Another point, what we see looking into the mirror is that neutrality of libraries creates a further difficulty. Our commitment to intellectual freedom and access to a diverse viewpoints is essential to public trust. But neutrality can be often misread as institutional passivity. In polarized societies, libraries may become targets precisely because they refuse ideological simplification. Yet the answer cannot be withdrawal. Non-partisanship must not become silence. If we avoid political and technological debate ourselves, we will not remain neutral. We will simply be pushed out by others. And finally, I think we should also be honest about our own responsibility. If libraries are absent from AI policies and even academic freedom debates, and it was striking for me, the EU policy guidelines view the library as a venue of their of their event, but did not mention library in any kind of reference in the final document on academic freedom. I think it's alarming. I think it's also not only the case of external neglect. At times, we also have spoken too softly, hidden behind professional modesty, or allowed contemporary vocabulary, like overly repeating the vocabulary on access to information. We are information resources. We talk about inclusion, with digital skills, about digital media literacy before we talk about reading. We also have been trapped in this world of buzzwords, and we hope that we'll be liked more if we use them, but then we float free from the stronger center that gives actually us the meaning. And we should insist that libraries are named explicitly as libraries, as librarians, as library services, as library idea in these documents. So that center is not complicated. What we need to talk, as I mentioned, it is books, reading, collections, memory, library itself, librarians. And libraries should be included in an AI policy, because AI governance without libraries is governance without one of society's oldest systems for provenance and verification. In this sense, the library is close to a civic birthright, a public guarantee that knowledge should not be entirely mediated by markets, platforms, and private infrastructures. I will cut one part and I will go on to my last previous slide. But what I wanted to finish is about how we can actually talk more about the libraries and the habits. Knowledge is not defended in policy alone, and libraries will not be only defended by any kind of wise policies by our politicians. It will be defended by repeated practice, and by us as libraries remaining this repeated practice under the terms that are library terms, and we should not shy away from those. So this means also the final meaning of library magic, and it is a habit. I have argued that reading changes a person, that libraries preserve memory and enable civic conversations, and that technology must be stewarded. The next claim is more demanding. Libraries must become a habit, both for inhabitants, but also a habit for our governments. Whenever they need, they must have libraries by their side to make decisions. Habit here is not a routine in the dead sense, but it is actually, we go back to the magical ritual. Sustaining habits of libraries will ensure that this magical ritual continues in our societies, a repeated meaningful act that shapes character and culture. We should cultivate also the library as a disciplined, life-sustaining habit of curiosity and growth. And libraries should thus become daily or weekly rituals for inquiry, individual learning, for families and schools, and also governments and decision makers. And programming can anchor that in either ourselves putting into the policymaker's shoes, or by making sure we are invited. Because pattern and practices endure when they become lived rhythms. A civilization survives not merely by storing these artifacts and by silently guarding them, but by preserving also the gestures that make artifacts meaningful and our collections meaningful, and that make really library a habit. Books may be digitized, manuscripts may vanish, formats will change, but if the habit remains, the repeated act of returning to texts, discussing them, teaching them, and learning through them, it will survive, and we will have encoded it for the next generations to come, whatever technological changes. So the argument then is not that libraries are magical because we somehow live above the world or escape it. We are magical because we keep returning society to the core habits and practices that ensure growth for the generations ahead. We make memory outlive presence, keep languages alive, and preserve the possibility that the society may stop time long enough to think. So if this is not magic, I do not know what is. And I think we have to take libraries as magic. And then also perhaps the center will hold. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm very sorry for keeping you a little bit too long. Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies, Dagnia, for that great presentation, that tour de force on the power of learning, of words, of reading, the transformative nature of libraries. I know I've had a brain stretch, so it's always a good thing to come out from a presentation like that to feel like just valued and empowered for us and for our community. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions just to keep on schedule, so our next presentation will be from one of our sponsors, but obviously Dagnia is around if anybody wants to come and talk to her today or tomorrow. So thank you again.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Valentin Bogorov, and I'm here to represent Clarivate, and I'm absolutely delighted to have a chance to present at this great conference. I'm going to have just 5 minutes. I see that it has already started, so it's really the blink of an eye. So let me move quickly, particularly since I will be dealing with the insights in the changes in the complex global research landscape. Let me ask you a quick question. There is one country which today is accounted for about 1/3 of all funding acknowledgements in the computer sciences. Which country is that? China? Yes, you are absolutely right. It is China, and for many people, this comes as a rather unexpected insight. And this number is not really a fluke. If we look at the trends in the global research funding, we can see that the funding from the traditional research powers, which have dominated the global funding arena for many years, such as the US, the European Union, the UK, Japan, and so on, funding from the sources remain flat, whereas we are witnessing a fantastic acceleration of funding coming from China. Let's take a look at the patterns in Ireland. And here, obviously, the funding scene has been dominated by the Irish funders and the funders from the European Union. But we can also see that in the last few years, the total amount of this funding has been declined, particularly as witnessed by funding acknowledgements. And when we look at the specific research fields, for example, here it's physics, then the granular picture is even more striking. For example, in physics, last year, for the first time ever, it's the Chinese funders which have been mentioned the most often in research papers with the participation of Irish scientists. So we are in the middle of the momentous and very profound change in the global funding for the research. And obviously, it has consequences that go far beyond the funding per se. Now, where have I gotten those insights? I've gotten them from Web of Science Research Intelligence, which is our new transformative AI-powered platform for the research analytics, which we just launched a couple of weeks ago. Now, before we did that, we did a massive survey of research offices and research libraries around the world, and we asked about the major challenges which they face. I think those challenges are very well known to everybody. And we also asked about the major problems they have when they work with the research analytics. And I can tell you that we expected an answer that the major challenge is a lack of data. But rather surprisingly, the answer was different. It wasn't a lack of data per se. In many ways, today, we drown in different kinds of data. The challenge was that that data is siloed, that different pieces of data, data on funding, data on research publications, data on impacts, data on societal impacts are not connected. So there is no single tool which would allow institutions to work with them. And therefore, we launched the Web of Science Research Intelligence. Here, we blend different data streams. We have enormous wealth of data which go far beyond the data on peer-reviewed research publications, which we have in Web of Science core collection, but we also have the data on funding, we have data on patents, we have many data which can help you to measure societal impact. And we leverage the power of AI to connect the dots for all this data. I'm afraid my time is almost up. I just wanted to show you very quickly one of perhaps the most interesting functionalities in Web of Science is we're using advanced bibliometric techniques to identify new breakthrough emerging topics for research. And here is the list of such emerging breakthrough topics for Ireland. I'm afraid I have to end my very brief presentation here. The blink of an eye is over. But please, if you have any questions, come and see us in our stand, and we'll be very happy to demo it to you and to show different aspects how the Web of Science Research Intelligence can connect different type of research data and how it can provide insights both at the local, at the national, and at the global level. Thank you.